Karen, it's the green and black pack with an orange ribbon on the outside.
You mean your new one?
No, it's an old pack. Oh God, sometimes it's easier to do things on your own. It's by the big blue bin.
With the black bin with the blue lid?
Well, it might be black.
Wait, oh, is this it?
Be careful with it, it's really delicate.
Is that the one?
I think so. Hello everybody. I hope you're all doing really well. Another beautiful day on the west coast of British Columbia. Actually, the weather has been like this for probably 2 or 3 weeks now, and it hasn't been all that inspiring for me. I think a lot of photographers feel that way or feel kind of uninspired during the summer. The light hasn't been all that exciting, and actually we've been getting quite a bit of smoke from Washington State blowing up here, so that's just not helped with the light at all. So the reality is that I haven't really taken any photographs since I got back from Iceland, which has been a few weeks now. Regardless, I'm here on my deck. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything better. Karen has given me a peace offering after throwing my pack at me from the attic. So thank you, Karen. The title of this video is What's in My Bag 2001. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to look through my camera bag from back in the day when I was shooting film. And yes, I do have all of my equipment from back then, and I'll explain why I still have my equipment. I will say that lately there's been a little bit of a resurgence in film photography. If you watch Thomas Heaton's videos, which I'm sure most of you do, you'll know that Tom's been shooting quite a bit of film with his Hasselblad. And then Alistair, he's also been shooting film with medium format. And of course there's Ben Horn, who's been shooting film forever on his 8x10. And there's a number of other YouTubers out there. Kyle McDougall, he has a great channel all about film photography. So there is definitely a little bit of a resurgence. And I think the main reason being is that film just has a much more tactile feel to it. The results aren't instantaneous. It does take a bit of a skill set to shoot with film and get the results that you want. Plus it's a lot of fun. Now, I've been a little bit apprehensive about bringing out all of my old gear, not because I don't like shooting film. It's just that for my uses, I just find digital so much easier. For me, photography is all about the experience that I have outdoors and not so much about my working with a camera and of course the final images. Having said that, there is definitely an advantage to using film, especially large format film, in that it really does slow you down, and I think overall it really will help in your photography and becoming a better photographer. The more you understand about your gear and how the process works, about light, also all of the technical aspects of photography, 4x5 is definitely a great learning tool. But I also realized that it's not for everybody, and you know, if you're just out there to get photographs and you don't want to be dealing with all the faff of setting up a camera, then, you know, 4x5 and film photography is probably not for you. So some of you might be thinking, well, what am I hoping to achieve by showing you this equipment, and what am I going to be doing with it? Well, a number of you have actually asked if I will be covering film photography, and I've been a little bit apprehensive because I'm not sure if I really want to get back into it that much, but I thought it would be really interesting to take the camera out and shoot some film and send that film in and kind of compare results to digital, like especially medium format and the differences and so on. And it might be a lot of fun. So without further delay, let's have a look at what's in my bag from 2001. I just used 2001 as a random number because I can't actually remember the last time I took this stuff out and actually used it properly. So let's have a quick look here and see what we have. Now, I'm not going to be covering any of this gear in great detail today. I'm just going to give you a quick overall view of what I have. And then in later videos, we can talk in more detail about the gear and its function. Right. So first up, this is a Harrison film pup tent. And basically what this is just a reduced camping tent with a couple of arm slots so that you can change your film in the dark when you're outside. You still have to be careful with these. You don't want to set them up in direct sunlight. Like an area like this would be perfect where there's no direct sunlight. Yeah, it's just for loading up your film holders. This is the smaller size, and then it comes in a larger size for 8x10 film, which I believe Ben Horn uses. Same tent, different size. Next, okay, so if you're going to get into medium format photography, especially with cameras without light meters, then you're going to need some kind of external light meter. And I would highly recommend that you not get an incident light meter. Those are more for studio photography. And you can tell the difference between a spot meter and an incident light meter. An incident light meter will have like a bit of a dome on it, whereas a spot meter, you actually have to look through the viewfinder in the spot meter and then pinpoint different areas to take your exposure from. There are meters out there. I know Alistair has one, and I believe Tom has one where it does both incident light readings and spot readings. This is a superb meter. I've had this for many, many years, and it's just superb. It's probably one of the best meters out there for spot reading. So we have the spot meter, and it actually comes in a real leather case, none of this cheap rubbish that you find today. And then of course we have a loop. This is so that I can focus on the ground glass on the back of my 4x5 camera. Now then, about the camera that I'm going to be showing you. This particular camera, there aren't that many of them around. And the reason being, it was made by a really obscure company called Toho. Now there is a 4x5 company, or there used to be, called Toyo, but this is actually made by a company called Toho. And they were a Japanese company. They made 4x5 cameras, and they also made tone arms for record players. Go figure. So they made a 4x5 camera, and they also made an 8x10, which I never, unfortunately, got to try. I would have loved to have tried one. The advantage to this camera, this is just half of the camera, is that this is what's called a rail camera. So there's two different types of 4x5. There's rail cameras, and then there's flatbed cameras or field cameras. The difference is that a field camera or flatbed, a lot of them come as a box, so they fold up on themselves, so they're more compact. The other camera, a rail camera like this, as the name suggests, it's on a rail. And most rail cameras you would find in more of a studio setting. And the reason being is that the majority of rail cameras are just too big and bulky. But the advantage to them is that you have way more movements on them, and also the bellows draw, or the length of the bellows, tends to be much longer, which is great if you want to use longer focal lengths. The problem with a lot of the field cameras is that the majority of them, the bellows draw was very short, so you could only go up to a certain focal length. Like you might be able to only go up to, say, 300 millimeters, as opposed with this, you could go up to 500 millimeters. 300 millimeters is great if you're just focusing to infinity, but as soon as you want to start doing close-ups, then your bellows draw starts to get longer and longer, and that's where the problem comes in. It's hard to get that bellows draw out far enough to take those images. So I discovered this company quite some time ago, there were a couple of companies that made lightweight rail cameras. There was this one, and then there was another one called Gowland, which their cameras were really, really flimsy. This one is a step up from the Gowland. It has some great movements on it, but it's a little bit sloppy. The knobs on it they're not really precise, so you really had to crank down on the knobs to make it solid. So let me just set this up really quickly, just so you can kind of see. Incidentally, the tripod I'm using is a new one. I haven't changed tripods from FLM, but this is a new one from Colorado Tripod Company that they just sent out to me to give a try and give my thoughts on. So we'll just be setting up on this. And the head is actually a Kirk ball head that I've had for many, many years. So let's just set this up quickly. So there is a front and a rear on this camera. The higher end is the front, and this is the rear. So this is actually the rail itself, like that. And then in this bag here, and it's quite funny because this is the bag that the camera came in when I bought this camera. And I'll put a close-up of the label here, but it's quite funny. So I don't know if they made this bag for the camera or just some kind of bag that was lying around the shop. I don't know. So this is the Bellows here, and you can see that it's just like a Bellows on a concertina. Now the only disadvantage to this rail camera is that if you want to do verticals, then you would have to undo all the knobs and actually physically turn the bellows, whereas a lot of the field cameras or the flatbed cameras would actually have a rotating back on them. So we're just going to put this on really quickly. And you can see that the movements on this are extreme. Not that you would ever use these movements for anything, but I mean they're pretty drastic. You could do pretty much anything or photograph anything on any plane of focus with this camera, and that was a huge advantage with this camera. So just going over this really quickly so this video doesn't drag on for hours and hours. This section here is the ground glass in there, and this is where your lens would go on. It's a pretty basic camera, and of course the rail would extend for, as I said before, up to 500 millimeters, like so. So as you can see, there was a huge advantage to using this little guy. It's very lightweight, and because of the bellows draw and the amount of movements that you had with this camera, it made an excellent camera for outdoor use and landscape photography. Okay, next in my bag, we have this. This goes over the back of the camera. One of the disadvantages to using a 4x5 is that you need some kind of hood to block the light. The one that comes with the camera is not very good, so you just take that off, and I would just put this over the back of the camera, and then of course my head would go in here so you can see what's happening on the ground glass at the back. This little device here is this is actually off another camera system that I had. This is my third 4x5. My very first one was a Linhof Technica 3, and then my next camera was a Linhof Technica 4, and they still make Linhof Technica cameras, the Linhof Technica master camera, but the price is just astronomical. I think a new Technica you can buy, I think it'll cost you about $13,000 US, and that's without any lens or any accessories. So, but you imagine they probably don't sell too many of them, so that's why they're so expensive. But this was actually off a Linhof Technica, and I just found this ingenious, and I use this all the time to find my compositions. The neat thing about it is that this was actually a rangefinder that went on top of the camera for press photographers, but what I used it for was whenever I wanted to compose an image, I could just zoom this in and out, and of course it would act just like a regular zoom on any other camera. And here is a guide to the focal length. So I'd look through this, find my composition, and then I just look on the side here and it would give me the focal length that I needed, and then I just put that on my camera, and it was reasonably close. This one actually needs adjusting, but this was an excellent tool for composition. And actually I've even thought about taking this out in the field with me with my digital cameras to find compositions. I like this device so much. Next, are pretty much all lenses. So one of the reasons why I've kept this stuff is that it took me so many years to keep selling and buying. Most of this stuff was used just to get the right focal lengths, because with these lenses, 4x5 lenses, there are so many different types and they all have a different function. Most of the 4x5 lenses aren't made for landscape photography. A lot of them are used for studio photography. So again, kind of like my 35mm camera, a lot of my lenses were much slower lenses because I didn't need the speed or the weight. The problem with slower lenses is that it's harder to focus on the back of the camera, especially the wide angle lenses. So for this camera, I have several lenses. This is a Cymar 150, 5.6. So that would be about the equivalent of a 50mm on a 35mm camera. And you'll notice that every one of these has its own cable release, because each lens has its own shutter, f-stops. I mean, it's all in the lens. The lens boards on these are round rather than square. Most cameras, they're square. So we have the 150, and then we have probably the most expensive lens that I ever bought for 4x5. This is a Cymar 80 XL, Super Cymar. This was the only lens that I bought brand new as well. And I just noticed it doesn't have a cable release on it. So that's 80, so that would be my wide angle lens. That's the widest lens that I have for this camera. Then we have, oops. This is a Nikkor M 200mm, and this is f8. And then I also have, this is the Nikon M 300mm. This is f9. And I think this camera, I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that this lens will actually work on an 8x10 as well. The circle is large enough that it'll cover 8x10 film, but I could be wrong there. I could be wrong. And then lastly, this beast or behemoth is actually two lenses in one. This is a Nikon 360mm. But the unique thing about this lens is that you can take the rear element off and put on this rear element, and it would either give you a 360mm or a 500mm. Now, I didn't use this lens very much because it's extremely heavy, and 500mm, I'd be pushing it with this camera with a Bellows draw. But I did use it on a number of occasions, and some of my favorite shots are taken with this lens, and I'll put one up right now that you can see. I absolutely love this photograph. Right, next on the list, I actually found some unused film in here. So I'm really happy about that, because film, I hear, is extremely expensive. So I found 75 sheets, no less. Now then, it has been sitting in my pack for the last probably 15 years, so I have no idea what kind of condition it's in. It's probably fine. There might be a color cast to it though. Most film, as long as you haven't stored it in really hot conditions, it'll probably be fine. But ideally, you want to try and store it in the fridge. And then, now, lastly, and I'll go over this in more detail some other time, this is an extremely unique film holder. This is a film holder made by Fuji, and this was called the, I've got to remember the name of it now. There's different types of holders you can get. You can get the regular film holders, which hold 2 sheets of film, which I have lots of at home. But the problem is they take up a lot of room. And then there was the Ready Load, which were excellent. And what they did is you had the holder, and then you had each individual sheet of film was pre-packaged so that you didn't have to load film into holders. So you would put the film in the holder, pull the paper out, take your shot, push the paper back in, and then you could just take the film to the lab. This holder here is actually called a quick change, and it actually holds 8 sheets of film. So there's 8 septums in there, plastic septums, and as you pull the holder up, it pushes the film forward. When you close it down, it pushes it back. So it's almost like a motor drive for your 4x5. These are extremely difficult to find, and I don't even know if you can find them these days. They were originally made to just be used once. They came preloaded with 8 sheets of film, and then once you'd used all that film, you would send this whole device in, and they develop the film and just dispose of the holder. But the holders are so well made that someone discovered that you could reuse them. And I've been using this for, well, I had been using this for quite a few years before I stopped using 4x5. So it's a great holder. So the holder itself is metal, and then the cassettes, I have 4 of them. So that's 32 sheets of film in a relatively small package. So it was a great thing to carry in your pack, especially when you're backpacking. All right, and that's pretty much it. So I'm somewhat excited to get this moving again, trying out the old 4x5. I haven't used it for quite some time, so I'm sure it's going to take me a while to get rid of the cobwebs and remember how to use some of this stuff. I used 4x5 for probably about 10 to 15 years. And I remember that the first experience I had with a 4x5 was one that I used from the college that I went to. And I was determined to take a landscape photograph in North Vancouver. And I hauled this thing around, and I'm not kidding, the camera, which was called a Calumet, it was a studio camera, and I hauled it around the woods in this big metal case. And I'm not kidding, the thing must have weighed about 50 pounds. And I actually did my back in carrying this thing up a scree of rocks. I mean, there's just no way in hell that I would do that now. But back then I was just so enthusiastic that I would do anything to use a 4x5 in the field. So, like I said, I'm pretty excited. It might be a bit of a slow process because getting E6 processed, there's nowhere on the island that I know of that'll do E6. So I'm going to have to take it into Vancouver, which is obviously going to take some time to do. So bear with me. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos about 4x5 and the various pieces of equipment, and I'll talk a little bit about them. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. We'll see how it goes. It might be a total disaster. All right, everybody, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this departure from my normal videos. If you did, be sure to give me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you next week in Iceland once again. Bye-bye.